Segment 4. Intimacy, death, and the spaces between. Night deepens over the Nile. Stars emerge in the vast desert sky, the same constellations the ancient Egyptians watched and named. In this quiet darkness, we explore the most intimate aspects of their lives: love and loss, desire and death, the profound and the profoundly ordinary. Let yourself sink deeper into rest as we walk through these final shadows of ancient Egyptian life. Fact 31. The wedding night and fertility magic. There was no grand wedding ceremony in ancient Egypt as we'd recognize it, but the wedding night itself was surrounded by rituals and hopes. The bride would often wear a special fertility amulet, perhaps an image of Tauret, the hippopotamus goddess of childbirth, or Bes, the protective dwarf god. The couple's families might place symbols of fertility around the bed. Fish, which were associated with reproduction, or mandrake fruits, believed to increase desire and fertility. Some couples would drink a special beverage made from honey, dates, and beer, thought to ensure conception. The bed itself was important. For those who could afford it, beds had footboards decorated with images of Bes to protect the couple and any children conceived there. Magic spells might be whispered or written on papyrus and placed under the mattress. After the first night together, there were sometimes small celebrations, with the couple receiving gifts for their new household. But mostly, marriage began quietly, with two people coming together in the darkness, surrounded by the hopes and prayers of their families, carrying the weight of expectation that they would create new life, continue the family line, and find companionship in each other. Some marriages bloomed into deep love. Others remained practical partnerships. But all began with that first night, magic and nervousness mixed together. Fact 32. The grain measurer's honest scales. In ancient Egypt's economy, grain was currency. Wheat and barley filled government granaries, paid workers' wages, and determined who ate and who went hungry. The grain measurers, officials responsible for assessing harvests, recording amounts, and distributing payments, held enormous power. Officially, these measurers were supposed to be scrupulously honest, and many took their duty seriously, knowing that inaccurate measurements could mean starvation for workers or unjust taxes for farmers. But the temptation for corruption was always present. Some measurers would use slightly smaller containers when measuring grain owed to them and slightly larger ones when measuring grain owed to others. Wall paintings sometimes show farmers desperately pleading with measurers, or being beaten for supposedly short deliveries. Other scenes show honest measurers carefully leveling their containers, ensuring fair measurement. These officials had to be literate, able to calculate quickly, and trusted by both the government and the people. In a civilization built on grain, the measurer's scales held everyone's fate. A thumb placed subtly on the scale could tip the balance between plenty and hunger, between justice and exploitation. Fact 33. The secret language of flowers. Egyptians loved flowers with an intensity modern people can barely imagine. In a desert land, flowers were miracles, brief explosions of color and scent. The blue lotus, which grew in the Nile, was especially sacred. People would hold lotus flowers to their noses throughout the day, inhaling the scent, which may have had mild psychoactive properties. Lotus flowers were symbols of rebirth because they closed at night, sank below the water, and emerged again at dawn. At banquets, guests wore lotus flowers in their hair and held them while eating. Blue lotus wine was consumed for its relaxing effects. But flowers also carried messages. Giving someone a particular flower could convey meanings that words could not. A lotus offered rebirth, purity, renewal. Poppies suggested sleep, peace, forgetfulness. The cornflower meant faithful love. Mandrake, with its suggestive forked root, was frankly sexual. Young lovers developed elaborate codes. Which flower, how many, how they were arranged, whether wilted or fresh, whether given openly or left secretly. An older woman receiving flowers from a younger man might be flattered or scandalized depending on the type. Flowers decorated temples, homes, and tombs. They were crushed for perfume, dried for medicine, and woven into garlands. In Egypt's harsh landscape, flowers represented everything delicate, beautiful, and temporary, a reminder to appreciate beauty while it lasted. Fact 34. The mourning women. When someone died, especially someone important, professional mourning women were hired to amplify the family's grief. These women were performers of sorrow, skilled in the expressions and rituals of lamentation. They would arrive at the funeral with hair unbound, dust rubbed on their faces, clothes torn deliberately. As the funeral procession moved toward the tomb, they would wail in specific rhythms, tear at their hair, beat their breasts, and throw dust over themselves. Their cries weren't random. They followed traditional patterns, almost like songs, calling out the virtues of the deceased, lamenting the loss to the family, expressing the community's sorrow. For wealthy funerals, dozens of these mourning women might be employed, creating a wall of sound and theatrical grief. This wasn't considered fake or disrespectful. Quite the opposite. It was understood that not everyone could fully express their grief in the moment, and these professional mourners ensured the deceased received the dramatic send-off they deserved. The more mourners, the more important the person. Some women made their entire living this way, becoming known for particularly effective wailing or dramatic gestures. They had to genuinely tap into grief, channeling all the losses they'd experienced, allowing real tears to flow for strangers. It was exhausting emotional labor, but it was respected work, because death deserved to be acknowledged loudly and completely. Fact 35. The tattoo artists and their needles. Tattoos in ancient Egypt were not as common as in some cultures, but they existed, primarily on women. Female mummies have been found with tattoos, geometric patterns of dots and lines on thighs, lower abdomen, and breasts. For a long time, scholars assumed these tattoos marked prostitutes or enslaved people, but more recent research suggests they were therapeutic or protective, particularly related to pregnancy and childbirth. The patterns might have been meant to protect the womb, to assist with difficult births, or to mark women who had survived multiple pregnancies. Some may have been marks of religious devotion to fertility goddesses. The tattoo artists used bronze needles or thorns, dipping them in soot or other dark pigments, then repeatedly pricking the skin until the design emerged in the body. It was painful, probably done over multiple sessions, and carried risk of infection. But women chose to undergo this process, suggesting the tattoos held significant meaning. Some evidence also points to tattoos on dancers and musicians, perhaps marking their profession, perhaps purely decorative. Unlike the elaborate full-body tattoos of some cultures, Egyptian tattoos were subtle, meant to be seen only by intimate partners or during childbirth. Hidden messages written on the body, connecting the physical form to spiritual protection and feminine power. Fact 36. The letter writers of the market. Not everyone in ancient Egypt could read and write. Literacy was limited to scribes, priests, officials, and some wealthy individuals. But everyone had need of letters. So in every marketplace, professional letter writers set up small stations with papyrus, ink, and reed pens. A woman wanting to send a message to her son working in another city would approach the letter writer, dictate her words, and he would transform her speech into hieratic script, the cursive form of hieroglyphs. The letter writer was more than a transcriber. He was an advisor on tone and etiquette. He might suggest more formal language for a letter to an official, or add traditional blessings to a letter between family members. He knew the formulas, the proper openings and closings, the ways to make a letter persuasive or affectionate or commanding. Sometimes people would ask him to read letters they'd received, trusting him with their private business. The good letter writers kept these confidences, understanding that their reputation depended on discretion. They witnessed love affairs carried on through dictated correspondence, business deals negotiated, family disputes aired, condolences offered. Fact 37. The incense clocks. Ancient Egyptians had various methods of tracking time, but one of the most unusual was the incense clock. These were coils or sticks of compressed incense with different scents or materials marking different intervals. As the incense burned, it would move through these sections, each releasing a different smell or dropping small weighted markers suspended from strings. In temples, priests used elaborate incense clocks to know when to perform different rituals throughout the night. In wealthy homes, these clocks served practical purposes. The changing scent might signal time for a meal, time for business appointments, or time to prepare for bed. Some incense clocks included small bells or gongs that would fall when the burn reached certain points, creating sound markers in addition to scent changes. The concept seems strange to us, accustomed to visual timepieces, but for ancient Egyptians, measuring time through scent made perfect sense. They already burned incense constantly for religious and practical reasons, so incorporating timekeeping into this practice was natural. Imagine living in a world where time had a smell. Morning smelled of frankincense, afternoon of myrrh, evening of kifi. Fact 38. The wet nurses and milk contracts. Breastfeeding was universal in ancient Egypt, but not always by the biological mother. Wealthy women, women who died in childbirth, or women unable to produce milk would hire wet nurses, women who had recently given birth themselves and had milk to spare. These arrangements were formalized with contracts specifying the duration of service, the payment, often in grain, oil, and clothing, and expectations for the child's care. A wet nurse might live in the employer's household or take the baby into her own home. The relationship could become deeply affectionate. Some wet nurses remained close to their charges for life, and some were even buried in their employer's family tombs, honored as vital family members. But there was also an economic reality. Poor women would sometimes wean their own children early to take positions nursing wealthier children, as the pay was essential for family survival. Medical texts gave advice on choosing a wet nurse. She should be healthy, recently delivered, of good character, and her own child should be thriving. There were spells to increase milk production and remedies for nursing problems. The bond between nurse and child was considered almost mystical. Drinking someone's milk created a connection, and some believed character traits could be transmitted through breast milk. Fact 39. The river crossing blessing. Every time ancient Egyptians needed to cross the Nile, whether by boat, ferry, or the rare bridge, many would pause to say a small prayer or make a gesture of respect to Hapi, the god of the Nile flood, or to the river itself, which was seen as a living divine entity. The Nile could give life and take it. Crocodiles and hippos lurked in its waters. Sudden winds could capsize boats. People drowned regularly. So crossing was never casual. Mothers would hold children tighter. Men would touch amulets. Some would pour a small libation of beer or water into the river as offering. Ferrymen were considered to have special protection from river gods due to their constant crossings, but even they showed respect. There were professional ferrymen at major crossing points, operating large boats that could carry people, animals, and cargo. They knew the currents, the safe crossing times, the places where sandbars shifted. But they also knew prayers and carried protective symbols on their boats. For most Egyptians, crossing the Nile was never routine. It was a moment of vulnerability, a brief journey through dangerous divine space, requiring respect and caution. And every successful crossing earned a mental note of thanks, a small acknowledgement that the river had permitted safe passage one more time. Fact 40. The sleep of the just and the restless. Finally, as our journey through ancient Egypt's nights draws toward its end, consider how the Egyptians themselves slept. Their sleep was different from ours, more fragmented, more connected to natural rhythms. Without artificial light, they slept when darkness fell and woke with dawn. Though summer nights were shorter than winter nights, so sleep duration varied with seasons. Many would wake in the middle of the night, the hours after midnight used for quiet tasks, for intimacy between couples, for prayer or contemplation. Some medical texts suggest interrupted sleep was considered normal, even healthy. Dreams visited in these dark hours were thought most meaningful. The night was alive with sounds modern people rarely experience. The complete darkness broken only by stars and moon, the calls of night animals, the sound of the Nile flowing endlessly past. People slept surrounded by family, rarely alone. Infants slept with mothers, children piled together, elderly parents in the same room. Privacy was a luxury few experienced. And when morning came, as it always did, the ancient Egyptians rose, stretched on their hard headrests, began the cycle again. Work and rest, ritual and routine, the endless beautiful ordinary procession of days along the Nile, each one a gift, each night a small death and resurrection, preparing them for the eternal sleep and eternal waking they believed awaited them in the West. And now, our time in ancient Egypt fades like a dream remembered upon waking. The voices of these long-ago people grow quiet. The scents of their incense dissipate. The Nile continues flowing, as it has for millennia, through a land both ancient and eternal. You have walked through their days and nights, felt their joys and sorrows, understood their strangeness and their humanity. Let their world fade now. Let sleep take you gently, as it took them night after night for thousands of years. Rest well, knowing that you are connected to all who have ever closed their eyes and surrendered to sleep's embrace. Good night.